So oil and gas and coal have been the main drivers for the economy in terms of energy production. But it was, about 18 months ago that the President has announced some very aggressive new targets for reducing carbon emissions in Indonesia. And what Indonesia has, in order to help fulfill those targets, are some very substantial resources of alternative energy and renewables. However, in order to get these on stream and to make them commercially viable, there's a number of actions that both government and the private sector are going to have to take.
The impact of so-called renewable energy or alternative energy on the overall energy mix is still less than, I would say, 10%. So the so-called conventional energy sources are still very dominant. And indeed, it would be possible to today source all of our requirements within just the traditional or conventional energy sources. But what Indonesia is doing here is actually basically preparing itself for the point in time whenever we start to run out of those.
We're sitting on some of the biggest geothermal resources in the world, and there's approximately 75,000 megawatts of hydro potential in the country. So green energy, clean energy, whatever you want to call it, should be going ahead full speed ahead.
There are probably three main roadblocks that exist today. One of them is involves pricing of alternative energies that new and renewable energies need to compete against. If you then switched across and said, well, okay, pricing is not ideal, but what's the government doing to make up for this by giving incentives to renewable energy producers? The answer is not a lot. At the moment, it's probably restricted to avoiding them having to pay VAT and import duty on imported goods. But that's not enough to close the gap. So more needs to be done in that area. And then government themselves, well, they have the power to do a lot, power to really push this sector forward. And at the moment, I think they will, at their own admission, recognise that there's quite a lot of interdepartmental confusion, a lack of clarity as who's responsible for what, and even the targets. You talk to several people and they probably have a different version of what their targets are for their sectors. So I think that government too have got quite a lot to do in terms of communicating and coordinating.
Landfill gas it's made up of, half of it's made up of methane gas. And methane gas is the component of natural gas, so it's energy source. So we make use of that, which is just going up in the air, all the time, every day in every landfill. So we're actually making power out of it. Okay, it's not in a big power plant scale, but the amount of work it can do, the amount of benefit it can bring locally to landfill is considerable. So the environmental benefit, the contribution towards energy security is there, even from a small scale project. And I think the replicability, the scalability is there. So if a lot of landfills does it does add up.
There's about 27 or 28, possibly 30 gigawatts of electricity potential just in geothermal. That's more than half of the geothermal potential of the globe, and that's just in Indonesia. It's an enormous competitive advantage that Indonesia should be taking advantage of. And geothermal developers don't want special treatment, they just want a recognition that the pricing structure needs to reflect the fact that there's very high upfront costs that segue into very low ongoing life cycle costs.
The government could make it very clear what the regulations are on geothermal and promote the idea of bringing in foreign investment and local investment for geothermal, and make it a standard power purchase agreement. So most of the details of how you do a geothermal is very straightforward.
The industry has shown that it can finance projects once they're approved. The problem is in getting to the approval and the licensing stage, and that needs coordinated action from government, and that does not exist at the moment.
Regional governments have now the responsibility for conducting tenders for all new geothermal fields. but they, at their own admission, do not have all the technical capability in terms of understanding how to run a geothermal tender. And so they've got the responsibility, but they haven't necessarily got the wherewithal. My understanding is that the central government are now taking steps to help resolve that, but that's only just happened recently.
Hydro business has not been an area that a lot of companies had looked at, and on the CDM point of view, there are issues with the World Commission on Dams.
What's holding it all back is regulation clarity and the actual power purchase agreement.
Given the government has increased the renewable tariffs, there are big incentives now for companies to look at geothermal and hydro, alternative energy sources rather than the traditional coal-fired power stations. I believe that there's a number of companies now that will be looking at the mini hydro industry, given that they get better rewards for the tariffs.
Indonesia last year or the year before was the largest coal exporter in the world. This is only an example how much coal we have in this country. And where you have coal, in most cases you have coal-bed methane. So instead of just exploiting the coal, you could actually also at the same time, or before you exploit the coal, actually drill holes in the same coal bed and try to extract the methane before you mine the coal. And hence you have another source of methane or gas, natural gas, that can be used for power generation purposes. As a whole, coal methane worldwide is known in other countries such as the United States or Canada, but Indonesia as an industry, it is new. The regulation were only established I think in 2008, and you can imagine before that nobody was really legally active in coal-bed methane, and now we are just starting to do our exploration. There is not one single full commercial production in place right now, so we are actually in the pioneering phase of the industry.
There's a lot of government departments involved in this now. Now, who is responsible for which parts of the jigsaw, so that everybody knows who to come to, so there's not overlap, duplication, miscommunication, and be very clear about the pathway. Communicate to all of the stakeholders, and if there's any change made, make sure that everybody's aware of them, because at the moment there's a lot of confusion. There's some good stuff there, but they could make a huge difference by just getting their message straight and consistent.
I think Indonesia sometimes has an issue with making decisions that are pro-business but unfortunately not necessarily popular. A classic example would be the implementation or the correction of the existing labor laws in Indonesia, which are seen as pro-labor but not necessarily pro-business. And we need to balance that better. And some of the decisions to be made, and I don't want to be too specific, are probably not popular, but they are necessary to basically attract more people to come in Indonesia. Not only foreign investors, but in fact also for domestic investors.
The Philippines, during last year, introduced a renewable energy law, and one of the very substantial incentives that was passed as a result of this is that the corporate rate of income tax for renewable energy projects has been reduced from, I believe it to be 35% down to 15% for renewable energy projects. That's a huge incentive.
The collaboration between business and government is basically one of the driving forces for change and solution findings in Indonesia. It is not the only one, but it's a very important one. And I think in order to bring Indonesia to the next level of development, that collaboration and also the trust level on both sides needs to be increased and improved.
There's virtually no alternative energy that's not possible to deliver in Indonesia. The frustration, I think, for everybody is that at the moment it's punching way below its weight, and there is a huge opportunity if government connects up with industry and with technology providers. It can all be realized and can be realized quickly and can solve all the problems we've got environmentally as well as commercially. It's there, but now action needs to be taken.